Mr. Davies, can we just ask you, the PM has just announced that Randy Boissonnault is not in cabinet anymore. Should he still be an MP?
Well, I'm really gratified to see he's not in cabinet anymore. I think that's an overdue decision. And, you know, the amount of ethical breaches of Mr. Boissonnault, if that doesn't disentitle you from cabinet, I don't know what does. An MP is a bit of a different matter. I think that's up to the voters of his riding. You know, we're at most 11 months away from an election. I think probably ultimately it's up to the people of his riding to decide that.
And what do you make of how long it took for him, you know, a lot has come out on different issues around him over the last several months, and it's only now. Do you know what the tipping point was, or do you have a sense of why it took this long, or whether it was too long?
Well, I think it was too long. I think it speaks to the lack of a strong ethical compass by the Prime Minister and the Liberal government, you know, to have tied up Parliament for this long and to have, you know, subjected, I think, all parliamentarians to the spectre of Mr. Boissonnault's repeated, egregious behavior, I think damaged the process, and it should have happened much earlier.
On dental care, are you concerned that funding for it could dry up if supplementary estimates don't get passed?
Well, the funding for dental care was passed in last year's budget. Funding should flow, so no, I'm not worried about that at this point.
But Minister Gould said it was on it could be impacted by the delayed supplementary estimates. So
well, we have a supply bill coming up. I mean that basically is the funds that keep the lights on in government, so to speak. There's a lot of really important things in there: funding for veterans, funding for the Air Force, funding to pay our civil servants. So I'm hoping we can find a way forward to make sure that those funds flow.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Monsieur MacKinnon, est-ce que c'était la bonne décision que le Premier ministre a prise d'exclure M. Boissonnault du cabinet?
Je suis certain que ça a été une décision songée de la part des deux et je peux vraiment pas, j'en sais pas plus.
Est-ce que vous étiez confortable à travailler avec M. Boissonnault au cabinet malgré tout?
Je l'ai dit ce matin, je le répète, c'est quelqu'un que j'apprécie beaucoup, Randy Boissonnault.
Can I get that in English? What do you think is him being asked to step back from his cabinet?
Well, what I said is both he and the Prime Minister obviously came to a decision, and I can only but respect that decision. But Randy Boissonnault is a colleague that I appreciate very much.
Merci.
Do you think that he has his place in your caucus?
Well, it depends which caucus you're talking about. If you're talking about Indigenous caucus, Mr. Boissonnault has never gone to Indigenous caucus as an Indigenous person. I've said this many times. Since 2019, I've been chair of Indigenous caucus. He has never approached me and said, I want to be part of Indigenous caucus as anything but an ally. I've been clear with folks on that, and I'll continue. I've spoke to Randy about that, and you know, I think that part of the discussion needs to be told, is he is not a sitting member of Indigenous caucus as an Indigenous person.
But do you think that what's going on around him as a minister, he should maybe resign as a minister, and just to make sure to clear the air on this situation?
Well, the thing is, if you believe the Conservative frame on this, which has been disrespectful, disingenuous, and full of hypocrisy, because when they were in power, they didn't handle this file any better. And I don't even know if the Conservatives have an Indigenous caucus. Ask them. But when they come into the House, they pretend that they have all the answers for Indigenous people. It's that kind of thinking that got Harper knocked out by Indigenous people. It's that kind of thinking that had Idle No More. I was a protester before I was an MP, protesting the very things that Harper was doing to Indigenous peoples. So to hear them coming to the House of Commons with their hypocrisy, I don't agree with it, and I don't believe it. And all of the accusations towards Randy, you know, let him have his ability to talk to folks and to hear his story before people claim that, you know, he was using this for his own benefit and things like that, because that's not the conversations I've had with Randy. And so that's a frame of the Conservatives, and it's a frame that they're using successfully because the media has bought into what they're selling.
But when he was talking about his great-grandmother,
what do you know about that? Tell me what did he say about his great-grandmother?
Sorry, I'm one asking question. What he said he discovered lately more about the heritage of this family? Do you understand, and is it a good enough explanation?
I have to repeat, Randy has never claimed to be Indigenous to me.
Okay.
He said he had family members who were Indigenous, but he's never claimed to be Indigenous to me. And truthfully, there's no one definition for Indigenous people in Canada. There's a definition for Aboriginal people that's been held up in the Constitution of Canada. But then, within the realm of who's a status Indian, it's guided by the Indian Act. Most First Nations would say that Indian Act is wrong and discriminatory. Then you look at who is a Métis. There is no one consensus definition for who is a Métis. And in terms of the Inuit, there is no one consensus definition by law that says who is an Inuit. Race is a social construct. It's not a biological one.
Thanks, Dan.
But I have to reiterate, Randy has never said to me during the 5 years that I've been chair of Indigenous Caucus that he is Indigenous. And so when I hear people saying that he's a fake and a phony in the House, that's not accurate.
And
So I have to get to QP because I sit behind the Prime Minister.
We just learned that Mr. Boissonnault is no longer in the cabinet.
Okay.
Do you think that
I
it's a
don't
good
know if that's the
decision
case
from the
or not. I will talk to my colleagues and find out what's going on.
That has been a
What do you think?
I hear all the time from media about things. I will wait to hear
show you
it
the
from.
statement of the Prime Minister's office.
the
You can read it here.
Okay. Well,
What do you think?
I think that there's tough decisions that the Prime Minister has to make, and that's his prerogative to make based on a number of factors. All I can say is what I've been telling people for 3 days, and I know no one will put this in their coverage because I've been saying this for 3 days and watching the coverage, and it's unless I give that narrative that that the Conservatives have convinced everyone is that I do these scrums and I talk to authentically about Indigenous identity because I'm not only someone who researched it for 10 years, I published on it, and it's not as easy as people think it is.
You say he didn't claim to be Indigenous to you or while he was in the Indigenous Caucus, but his former company, when they tried to obtain the certification that it was an Indigenous company, was it maybe
From what I've heard
false
I'm at the OGO committee that's looking at this right now.
Mm-hmm.
There has never been a bid with Randy's name on it that has gotten any kind of funding.
But because he didn't get the certification saying this is an Indigenous company, but there was...
From the testimony, from what we've heard at committee on that, that's not an accurate description of what's going on.
Okay.
Anyway,
Randy Boissonnault quitte le cabinet, est-ce que c'était la bonne chose à faire?
Je pense qu'il était à peu près temps, c'était intenable, il ne pouvait plus rester dans le cabinet avec ces scandales-là. Mais ça vient démontrer deux choses, c'est-à-dire que les libéraux sont encore pris dans leur propre scandale interne, leur propre chicane, puis ils ne peuvent pas avoir l'esprit à gouverner. Puis en même temps, ça ne fait pas la fin de l'histoire. Il va falloir savoir exactement qu'est-ce qui s'est passé. Mais je pense que la pression politique était juste trop forte.
Just to clarify, you say this it's not over. What do you want to see next with Mr. Boissonnault?
But it's a real problem when you are a minister and your business is making having contracts with the federal government, and after that you get contracts because you pretend to be a First Nation company. So there's two levels of scandals hit there, and I don't think it's the end of the story for Mr. Boissonnault or the Liberal Party. Who knew what exactly?
Qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez, une enquête formelle ou comme...
On verra quelles sont les prochaines étapes. Une chose est sûre, c'est que ça vient montrer encore une fois que les libéraux sont pris dans leurs problèmes internes, sont pris dans leurs scandales internes, et qu'ils ne sont pas capables de livrer la marchandise pour les gens.
And can you comment, all the premiers, according to Doug Ford, now support doing bilateral trade with the U.S. and separate deals with Mexico. Does NDP have a position on this?
I'm not the international trade critic, so I don't want to.
Can I ask you about your pin? I noticed a few of your colleagues wearing it today. Are you all wearing it because of what happened to Heather McPherson earlier this week?
Exactly.
Can you explain that?
It's a pin solidarity. It's a pin in solidarity with the people of Gaza and Palestinian rights. It's a symbol of international solidarity. And Heather was attacked by the Speaker of the House, saying that it is a prop. It is not. MPs have the right to wear political signs or signs of solidarity. We do that all the time. We did it yesterday with Ukraine. There was no problem at all. To support our colleague, we are all wearing this beautiful watermelon today.
Est-ce que je peux juste vous poser une question sur les crédits budgétaires? Parce que ce qu'on comprend, là,
Oui.
c'est que pour
Il y a une
que...
date butoir, hein.
Ouais, il va y avoir une date butoir que l'argent puisse aller, par exemple,
Les
pour
sub-B
soins
ou
dentaires,
sub-C, là, je sais pas quoi.
Exactement, ça doit être voté avant Noël. Et là, dans le contexte actuel, la Chambre ne peut pas voter. Donc là, est-ce que ça vous place, vous, comme parti, dans une situation où vous pourriez être ouvert à l'idée d'appuyer, par exemple, un baillon pour vous assurer que l'argent qui doit, par exemple, aller au programme d'assurance dentaire y aille?
C'est sûr qu'on veut que l'argent aille au programme d'assurance dentaire. C'est notre plus gros gain qu'on a fait pour les Québécois et les Canadiens dans les 2 dernières années. Et en même temps, c'est la responsabilité du gouvernement libéral d'être transparent puis de fournir l'information qui est demandée aux parlementaires. Pourquoi envoyer des dizaines, des milliers de pages de documents qui sont caviardés où il n'y a pas d'information? C'est vraiment aux libéraux à se défendre. Et là, on risque d'arriver dans une situation qui arrive souvent aux États-Unis, où il y a un blocage budgétaire, ce qui n'est jamais vu ici au Parlement fédéral, mais ça va être la faute des libéraux qui ne fournissent pas l'information parlementaire, qui cachent des choses, puis la faute des conservateurs qui, eux autres, font des jeux politiques.
But given the NDP's position, given that state of play, does the NDP support fighting for the documents and not passing the budget bill, or is passing this new spending more important?
The position of the NDP is that the government is the government, and if they are asked to pass documents to the parliamentarians, it's their responsibility, not ours.
So you will not invoke closure on this filibuster?
So far, this is really not our intention.
Right, but at a certain point,
You know,
push is going to come to shove.
next
in the
week
next
will
4
be
weeks.
next week. We'll see.
Right, that's the point, right? Okay. Thank you.
Merci.
My name is Adam Van Koeverden. I'm the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and the MP for Milton. And I'm here to respond to a press conference downstairs hosted by the Greens, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois. First, I'd like to acknowledge that today is World Children's Day, and it's an important day to recognize that the climate crisis is having and will have a disproportionate impact on the health and the wellness of young people, as well as the future of this planet. I got involved in politics personally. I know that a lot of other people from other parties, as well as the Liberal Party, got involved to fight climate change and to bring forward climate action. And in the last 8 years, our government has undertaken over 100 measures to address emissions, to address the climate crisis, to reduce our impact on the environment, but also to address the biodiversity loss and crisis, as well as reduce pollution from all sources. Most recently, we've introduced a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector, which is a really, really important step in reducing our emissions. First, I'd like to acknowledge that Green Party leader Elizabeth May acknowledged that what we all know is that carbon pricing has played a really outsized role in reducing our emissions over the last 5 or 6 years in particular. And it's one of the reasons why our emissions have never been this low since 1997, which I often say as a sports fan and a fan of Connor McDavid is the year that Connor McDavid was born. Literally through his whole life, our emissions have never been this low. Something worth addressing. It's also worth noting that takes work, and that back in 2015, our government was tasked with the challenge of halting the runaway locomotive of Harper and Poilievre era government carte blanche, unlimited emissions and pollution from the oil and gas sector. The emissions that we were confronted with in 2015 from Canada were on an upward trajectory, and estimates suggest that if we didn't take the actions that we did, they'd be 30 to 40% higher today than they actually are. We've seen emissions now slow down, then stop going up, and now we've seen them reduce to the lowest levels that they've been since 1997. But we need to do more. We are 4% away from our enhanced target of emissions being under the 40 to 45% target level below the 2005 mark. And I will say that we are at 36% target, which is higher than was previously made, but we enhanced that ambition. We went a step farther. We wanted our task and our target to be in line with science, so we improved and increased our target reductions to 40 to 45%. So when cynics and opposition say that Canada's not on target to achieve our climate goals, they are wrong. We are accelerating all of these measures, and since 2019, we have reduced emissions quite markedly. And I would also say that with respect to all of the punditry going on right now, most and the majority of the suite of our emissions reductions programs and policies took effect in 2019 or around 2019. And since 2019, our emissions have come down significantly, but we need to do more. So I welcome a challenge and a push from parties who believe that we should have more climate action, but I'd also call on parties that have the ability to do so, namely the Bloc and the NDP, to help us end the parliamentary filibuster from Pierre Poilievre and Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives. Canadians need and deserve to see their government working for them, and we haven't seen that since September. And that's because of this immature and bogus parliamentary privilege debate that has been going on now for 3 months, and it has not allowed us to discuss important issues from affordability to fighting climate change to all the other issues that are faced by Canadians. So just in closing, I thank Elizabeth May for acknowledging that carbon pricing is an important step, but not the only step. It's one of over 100 measures that we have put forward to address the climate crisis. Our emissions cap on oil and gas production or pollution is an important step, and I'd also note that we've got significant opposition from the Conservatives and Premier Daniel Smith, who spent $7 million in public money from Alberta. I've been kind of joking, but it's not actually that funny that it's sort of equalization, because it's a Quebec company that's driving these trucks around that say scrap the cap. I'd like to say scrap the crap. Canadians deserve climate action. Alberta is an important province to our economy. They produce a ton of energy, but they're also a leader in renewables, and we need to make sure that a sector that's responsible for 5% of our GDP, which is currently responsible for 31% of our emissions, does better. And we know they're not going to do that on their own. So the oil and gas emissions cap is an important step to lowering the pollution from the energy sector, and we're proud of it. And we're calling on the NDP and the Bloc and the Greens to work with us to advance more climate action, because we see from Alberta Premier Daniel Smith and from Pierre Poilievre and Andrew Scheer's Conservatives, they want to do less to fight climate change, and they don't want to do anything to reduce our emissions. So happy to answer a couple questions.
Say that Canada won't meet its emissions targets. You refer to them as cynics, but the Environment Commissioner Jerry Demarco, it was his report that says that Canada won't meet its emission targets.
As I said, we're on target right now to reduce our emissions to 2005 levels by 36%. That's an enhanced target, because our old target was 30%. We aligned it with science to go farther and do more and be more ambitious to 40 to 45% of that target. We know that we need to do more. That's why we've introduced an oil and gas emissions cap to reduce pollution from that sector. We need to do more things, not less, but we know that Andrew Scheer and Pierre Poilievre, these Harper-era Conservatives that don't mind this runaway locomotive of unlimited pollution and carte blanche for the energy industry, that's not okay. What we need is more action, not less, and we're calling on the NDP and the Bloc to help us end this parliamentary filibuster so that we can do more action and take more steps. We've already taken 100 measures to lower emissions and fight pollution in Canada, and we certainly do need to do more. Thanks. Because that was thorough, right?
I just wanted to ask you about
Wait a bit because they want me upstairs. You go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask you about the consensus that Premier Ford says that he has on the negotiation of bilateral deals between Canada and Mexico, Canada and the United States. What do you make of that?
Well, I've commented a lot this morning. I was at we have this national conference with the U.S., Mexico, and Canada with manufacturing. What I said, my job is to promote Canadian industry, Canadian workers, and make sure that our American friends understand that when it comes to security, strategic supply chain, and a growth agenda, that Canada and the United States are very aligned. And therefore, we've been saying also to our Mexican friends that we understand the concerns that have been raised by our U.S. counterpart with respect to making sure that we protect critical strategic supply chain in North America. That's the best way to provide prosperity and create jobs in this economic space, which is unique in the world. So we're going to keep working with them, with the U.S. administration, and fight for Canadian workers.
And nothing in particular about, you have no feelings about the idea of bilateral deals between Canada?
My job is to fight for Canadian industry, Canadian workers, and making sure that our American friends really understand the unique nature of that relationship. And, that's what I've been doing from day one. That's what we'll keep on doing.
Et quelques mots sur la gestion de l'œuvre, ce qui se passe au Sénat.